Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind, episode 115.
A lot of newcomers come into the homeschooling thinking it's going to look an awful lot like the classroom down the street. But in fact, it doesn't. And that's when the real beauty of homeschooling begins to shine, is when you break out of that mold and are set free.
Benjamin Franklin once said, "Do not curse the darkness, rather light a candle instead." If you're ready to set your mind on fire, then prepare yourself for the Luminous Mind with your host, Rebecca Bowman.
Today's fire starter is Dr. Marie Claire Moreau, a proud-to-be homeschool mom to her kids. She helps families, writes books, and speaks on topics like parenting, education, homeschooling, and lifestyles to audiences all across the country. She has created this tool to help you experience the same great joy, fulfillment, and success that so many families, like hers, have experienced through homeschooling. She believes learning about home education should be easy. Join her as she explains homeschooling ideas in small pieces and in simple terms, navigating the homeschooling universe of information in one digestible bite at a time. Welcome, Marie.
Hi, hello, glad to be here.
I'm excited to have you. It has been a long time in the coming. Dr. Marie was actually a request from a listener, and so we've had this interview scheduled for quite a while because you're obviously pretty busy. Why don't you go ahead and tell our audience a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for having me. First of all, I'm really honored that someone actually requested that we get together, so I'm honored to hear that, and thank you so much. Yeah, so you can call me Marie Claire, or Marie is fine. I am basically a former college professor and a former school teacher, kind of converted to homeschool mom. So, I'm kind of coming from the realm of public education and suddenly, have converted myself and my entire family to home education. And, well, gosh, I've been doing this for about 25 years now, so this is not a new pursuit. But I just want to let you guys know that, I kind of understand that people are coming to homeschooling from all different backgrounds, from all different walks of life, all different, philosophies and so on. And so, gosh, I'm just so in love with the lifestyle and the benefits that it has provided to my kids and our family on the whole. So I'm just here to spread the good word about homeschooling, home education, to help families kind of redefine their meaning of what a good education really is. And as you said in your introduction, to really help families nationwide understand what home education is and what it isn't, and make sure that folks really understand that it's possible and it's very doable for anyone with the passion and desire to do so. So that's kind of my 30-minute spiel.
Well, I'm hoping we're going to hear more about that spiel. I'm just kind of curious what happened to cause you to choose to homeschool when you have an education in teaching.
Yeah, well, I guess, it's kind of maybe it's an interesting story to most people. I don't really know, because people do come to homeschooling for so many different reasons these days. As a matter of fact, I know we'll talk about this later on, but one of the things that I do now and have been doing maybe for the last 10, 15 years is I counsel families who are new to homeschooling. So I get to hear about all these different reasons that they've chosen homeschooling and how they've kind of dropped into it, sometimes on purpose and sometimes by accident. But in our case, the transition really happened when my husband and I started having children, right? And this is what often happens, I think, to a lot of couples where life changes when the first baby arrives. And then all of a sudden it's a whole different ballgame from what you thought it would be. And, in my case, of course, here I have this little bundle in my arms, and I'm looking at him and saying, oh, my goodness, I'm not going to be sharing him with anybody else. So, that was kind of the little seed that really started the whole thing. But really and truly, I would have to say what I guess the background story of it is that my husband and I are really strong believers in independent learning, self-directed learning, independent study type of learning, and it's something that we have always, we're just kind of like these old hippies, lifelong students, kind of learners people. So, when the little ones came along, it was just really natural for us to say, okay, how are these kids going to just, fit into this life plan, which is that we're always learning and we're curious and, we like to travel and we like to visit museums and soak up all of this great stuff. So how are the kids going to fit into this entire life plan? So, I know it seems a little odd coming from a college background. I was actually the chairperson of a very large computer science department prior to having kids, so it's quite a shift. But that's really kind of how it happened. It's through childbirth, it's through reflection and looking at our lifestyle and really what was valuable to us, which was learning, and trying to figure out how our kids were going to fit into that role. And they weren't going to. So that's kind of when the shift began to occur.
Well, and tell us a little bit more about that. I love to hear how your philosophy basically of what education looked like, where it was from, and how it's been changed over time and with experience, especially with an education background. We talked about the things that homeschooling is, what people think it is compared to what the reality really is.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, and I'll just start out by saying that being a teacher and having a background in education is not necessarily a good thing when one is homeschooling their kids. In effect, I feel like I almost kind of came into homeschooling with a handicap because while I thought I could do it all, knew it all, understood all the systems, the testing, the lesson planning, the textbooks and so on, it really kind of put me at a little disadvantage in a sense because I kind of started homeschooling doing all that same kind of stuff, which I think a lot of families, when they first hear about homeschooling, do actually believe that it looks a lot like the system of public education and try to duplicate that at home, at first. And I really did succumb to that too. I felt like, okay, this is kind of what I was doing there. I understand it. I'm good at it, and I can reach my students. Therefore, I will be able to reach my kids in the same way. And so I have to admit, over the first couple of years, I did a very traditional kind of duplicating public education system at home. But really, it wasn't until I began to kind of get into it, and my husband as well, because we both participated in homeschooling over the years. We're both like kind of equal partners, I'll say, with our kids. It really wasn't until we started watching our kids and really listening to them and really understanding, their hearts and their minds and watching them develop that we understood the real benefit of home education, the real way that our kids were going to be learning and the real opportunities that we had by keeping them home and just exposing them to this just world of information, resources, learning activities. So, again, I'm kind of describing this sort of maybe gradual shift that took a couple of years, but, it really wasn't until I kind of got into my kids' hearts, heads, and minds, I think, that I realized the real potential of home education, which did not come from books and did not come from lesson plans and did not come from grading papers, as I was used to doing. So it's a very interesting shift, and I share it with people because I think, as I said, a lot of newcomers come into the homeschooling thinking it's going to look an awful lot like the classroom down the street. But in fact, it doesn't, and that's when the real beauty of homeschooling begins to shine, is when you break out of that mold and are set free.
Well, that's great. And I was just looking at your bio, and you talk about how you believe that home education should be easy. I think that is an interesting way that you say that, because I think that a lot of us have this idea that home education is really difficult, having those kids underfoot, having to prepare lesson plans. What have you learned about home education that makes it easy?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not going to say homeschooling is easy, and obviously I think maybe what you're reading from is just the part where I talk about that I like to describe homeschooling in simple terms so that it's not so mystical and overwhelming to people.
Okay.
That, I think, is really what happens is sometimes when folks hear about homeschooling, it's all a matter of terminology and philosophies and, things that are kind of foreign, and it can be a bit of a scary thought. So what I really try to do is break it down for people and explain the terminology and explain, it isn't that big a deal. We do this, and it's a stepwise process, and you learn as you go, and you get to know your children, as I just described, and it does become easier over time and things like that. But I don't want anyone to ever think it's easy, because as a matter of fact, it can be very challenging. I always make sure to stress with all of my clients, families, and, anything that I write, that I really do consider homeschooling a lifestyle and kind of a full-time job. In fact, it's more than a full-time job, right, if it's a lifestyle, because it's something that you live 24/7. So I never want anyone to think it's easy, but I certainly want people to understand that it's doable, And I'm telling you what, you could present me with any kind of excuse for why you can't homeschool, don't think you can homeschool, or don't think you should homeschool. And I'm going to have an argument to the opposite, letting you know that, you know what, you really can, and I'll be able to solve all of those problems for you within 15 minutes, because anybody can if they have a true desire and heart to do it. But just getting back to your question just about family life and all of the different things that come up, I mean, I'm absolutely no stranger to that. You know, we run a home business, and sometimes we've had more than one home business going while we were homeschooling full time. So, you know, I'm no stranger to the challenges of raising kids and having new babies and having, you know, sickness and having business demands and all kinds of things. But because it is a lifestyle, you know, you just sort of grow into that role. And what happens is the difference between, I guess, the line between homeschooling and life becomes blurred and eventually disappears, whereas it isn't just a day-to-day activity between the hours of, you know, whatever, 9 and 3, and it's just kind of a lifestyle. So, hey, you know, we grow through life, we move through seasons, and we adapt depending on what we're faced with. So, yeah, I mean, it's not easy, but it certainly is possible. And I want to add, too, that, you know, I'm all about academic excellence. So I'm not a slacker mom, you know, and my kids are not slackers. We work hard, but we work hard in the sense that, you know, we just live a lifestyle of learning whenever, however, or, you know, how it's going to happen. It's just sort of our life kind of thing.
That's great. And I think, too, like to add to what you're saying, after you've had your children underfoot for a while, especially with all those circumstances that you explained, you realize how they're growing into that, too. Those opportunities, those challenges give them opportunities to grow and to become more, too. At least that's what I would add.
Well, absolutely. I mean, just running the business, for example, since we just happened to talk about that, is someone asked me recently how I was teaching entrepreneurial skills to my kids. And then I thought, you know, I'm not teaching entrepreneurship. My kids live entrepreneurship. You know, this is just what they know, what they do. They see us on a daily basis. You know, we talk about money and salaries and income and employees and billing, and who needs to teach that? It's just what they live. So, you know, it's just, as you say, you kind of just grow into it and do it. And, you know, it's not easy, but I mean, I wouldn't trade it for the world. The benefits, just the outcomes are just incredible, and we can talk about that if you want to later on, but I cannot recommend it highly enough. As you know, and most of your speakers are, you know, well acquainted with home education, there is just no comparison.
Yeah. Well, and I'd love to learn more about, you know, how your mission and your passion for homeschooling came up. You help numerous families. Anyway, and I'd love to hear more about how that all came to be.
Right. Well, you know, as I said, I've been homeschooling for well over 22, 23 years now. So I've kind of been at this for a long time. And what inevitably happens, right, is when you have a bit of experience, folks start asking you questions, and that just kind of snowballs. And before you know it, you're speaking to families and counseling newcomers and that kind of thing. And so, you know, that possibly, I guess, is just what sort of launched it. But I really do have a heart for homeschool families, and so my true love is really acquainting people with home education and helping them get past the initial hurdles so that they can see the possibilities and really experience it in their own lives. So yeah, I mean, I do counsel families. It's a great love of mine, and I spend a lot of time during the week. As a matter of fact, I have lots and lots of families that I counsel on a regular basis, or some on a one-time basis, and I like to stay in touch with families over social media and different outlets, too, through my writing and my blogs and that kind of thing, just because I feel like, you know, there needs to be a voice of someone out here saying, you can do this. Yes, it's not always easy, but it's always possible for the reasons that we've talked about it, and the rewards are enormous. So here I am. Just ask me the question. You know, I'm here for you. So some years ago, actually, just as the result of all of these various questions and counseling sessions, you know, I began doing a little bit more writing, and I actually developed a book in response to these kinds of questions, so that now I can actually just go out and say, hey, here's my best advice within the pages of this book, and go ahead and take a look. And if you still have questions, let me know. So I just like to be that person out there as a resource where families feel comfortable coming to, saying, hey, you know, I realize it's tough when we get into this phase of, you know, the teen years, or when the new baby comes home from the hospital, and how can we circumvent that and continue homeschooling and that kind of thing. So it just kind of developed, I guess, out of a natural sequence of events over the years. And now this is what I kind of do for a living, and I'm, you know, just so happy to be able to provide that service to people.
Well, and that's great. I'd love to hear more about some of the questions that people come to you about. You know, tell us some of those obstacles that you've seen that homeschoolers face, and then what you think they can learn from those obstacles.
Yeah. Well, wow. I mean, that's a question that could take us, several days. But one of the things that I do counsel families on quite a bit locally, and I'll just kind of throw that out because this is a large part of my work, is the area in which I live. I work with a lot of different families who are withdrawing children from schools and searching for schooling alternatives. So those kinds of families will often come to me with questions about why their children are not succeeding in school, or why the school system is not meeting their needs, right? So that is a big part of what I do, which is explaining the home education process, how one would get into it, how one would get started, and families will often have questions about making up deficiencies, weaknesses, areas where the kids maybe were struggling in school, that kind of thing. So, I work with families on a pretty regular basis about questions having to do with moving in and out of schools. But then also, questions just range from all kinds of things like, how do I know my child is really learning? A very basic one. And we talk about different ways to observe progress, that progress doesn't always have to be measurable with grades and transcripts. Or we talk about ways to, have discussions with our students or to monitor their learning in different ways other than the ways that, once again, families are used to seeing because they've grown up in a school system based on grades and transcripts. So we talk about different things like that. But really and truly, the questions are so varied. Most of the time we talk a lot about curriculum selections or methods of learning that might meet specific goals. I do enjoy curriculum from time to time, but that is not the only thing, that I recommend to families. So we talk about different ways of meeting learning goals. And I mean, it could go on, but, my primary emphasis has been over the years families that are kind of transitioning into homeschooling. And so we deal with a lot of the introductory kinds of things having to do with getting started.
That's great. Do you have more books than just the one book that you're talking about that answers questions? Tell us about some of those books and resources that you have.
Sure. Thanks. Well, the main book that I was just talking about a moment ago is called Suddenly Homeschooling. And that is a 2-week introduction to getting started with homeschooling. And we released the book initially in 2011, and we just released another one in 2015. And those are available on Amazon and any, kind of website that anybody wants to buy books on. But you'll see a description there, and you can look inside the book to kind of see what that's all about. But basically, that is just an introduction to homeschooling for families who have never done it before, or who are concerned that they need to have an extensive background or extensive budget, to do so, where I reassure them that it's possible with a minimum amount of time and resources. So there's that, and that actually has been really well received. So families tend to like that book because it tends to be very reassuring. And then I later wrote a book on homeschooling and science fairs, which I know is a little bit of a diversion there, but one of the things that families continued to talk to me about over and over were the scientific method and the lack of resources that were available for teaching kids about the scientific method and getting involved in science fairs leading to other science competitions and like science mastery. So I went ahead and I wrote a book called The Homeschooler's Guide to Science Fairs, which you can also see on Amazon. And the foreword was written by Janice Van Cleve. I don't know if you know Janice Van Cleve, but she contributed a great deal to that book too. And our goal was really to just make science fairs and learning about the scientific process doable for homeschool families, because there wasn't anything in existence to kind of explain the whole process to homeschoolers. So that was another fun one to do.
Yeah. Well, and that is a worry, too, of what kids are going to, how they're going to get some of those kind of hands-on experience with science and art and some of those that might require a more extensive lab. That's great.
Well, the whole idea was that, homeschoolers are either not welcome to participate in local science fairs within districts or don't really have the background or skills to participate and actually compete, whereas, we all know that our kids are perfectly capable of doing it and even winning those science fairs. So it was really an introduction to science fairs and how homeschool families could get involved or develop science fair programs of their own within their local communities or their regions. So, yeah, that turned out to be a really fun book for families. So we work with a lot of science fair families, too. It's fun.
Before we go on, let us take a minute and hear about our sponsors.
Hey Firestarters, this is Mark, producer of The Luminous Mind. If you're like me, the thought of going out to the store and shopping is enough to make you want to crawl in a hole and hide. If that's you, then do your shopping online through Amazon. Just go to theluminousmind.net, click on the Amazon link, and shop away. Also, most of the books and resources that Rebecca and her guests discuss can be found on our Amazon links as well. Again, if you're like me, you have already accidentally signed up for Amazon Prime. So most of those purchases should have free shipping as well. Good luck!
Welcome back to The Luminous Mind with Dr. Marie Claire Moreau. And do you have any other books then?
Well, I have a variety of different ebooks people can find on my website. You know, they can read ebooks about homeschooling high school or creating a homeschool plan. There's one about the characteristic traits of successful homeschoolers and things like that. And we are developing a program right now. Actually, can I mention it? The
sure.
title?
Sure.
There's a program that's under development right now, which is the Homeschool Master Class. The Homeschool Master Class is going to be a series of videos and online training courses for people to go in and just selectively receive homeschool training or continuing education in the different areas that they want to know about. For example, how to prepare high schoolers for college or how to create a high school transcript, for instance, that kind of thing. So they're going to be targeted training modules for parents to go in and selectively learn what they need to know.
And what's the name of that one again then?
That is called Homeschool Masterclass.
Oh, wow. That sounds neat.
Yeah.
Homeschool Masterclass.
Yeah.
That sounds great. And you talked about earlier when we first scheduled this that you were coming out with a quick homeschool startup. What's that about? Is that kind of for those people who want to just jump in quickly?
Yeah, that's actually the book that we were just talking about a moment ago, the book called Suddenly Homeschooling, which is the Quick Start program for 2 weeks. It's called Suddenly Homeschooling.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. And something that somebody can read if they feel like they have to pull their kids out quickly, right? Right? So.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I'll just offer, if folks are kind of interested in knowing what that book is about and how it might benefit them, on my website, on the page having to do with the book, the Suddenly Homeschooling book, there is a free chapter that folks can download. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because in that free chapter that we're offering for download, there are testimonials and stories from a variety of different families that I've worked with over the years, just talking about the different circumstances that led them to homeschooling to begin with, like divorce, custody issues, students who were unsuccessful in school, death in the family, travel, different scenarios like that that actually bring families to homeschooling to begin with. So folks that are interested in that book, they can actually download a free chapter and kind of get a glimpse into why different families will come to homeschooling and how homeschooling can address those kinds of concerns.
Those are great. And I would love to hear more about some of those testimonials, maybe ways that you've seen. I mean, we've talked about all through this podcast, I've been talking to you, the successes that we've seen. What are some of those that you've seen personally or, you know, with the families that you've worked with?
Sure. You know, first and foremost, I guess the one that always comes to my mind is college success, right? So we can talk about success at the younger ages, but I think what most people always want to know, and right, the first question on everyone's lips is, are these kids going to get jobs? Are they going to go to college? Are they going to be successful, right?
Yeah, how do they interact with everyone else in the world?
You know, so the research bears this out too, but, you know, we see student after student after student succeeding in college. So let's talk about that for just a minute, right? We know that homeschoolers get into college at higher rates. They stay longer in college. They receive more financial aid. They enter with a greater number of credits, like early college credits, before even going to college. So those successes really are just kind of no-brainers. They happen on an everyday basis. And so a lot of the students that I work with are actually in high school and want to make sure that they're going to secure and lock in those college admissions, and also want to make sure that they receive the big money in scholarships. So these are successes that I see day after day after day. And if I can just mention my own kids, I mean, my own kids have been enormously successful in those areas as well, and all of my kids have attended college 100% free with scholarships.
Oh,
and
wow.
have been highly successful. So, I mean, just, you know, as using as a personal example, but also my clients, that's an area where we see tremendous successes among homeschoolers that are seeking college admission, that's not for everybody, I understand, but those who do are enormously successful in college.
That is
so that's
wonderful.
one area.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Those are
and
great.
then, of course, you know, we see a lot of kids with different needs, I'll say. I hate the term special needs. I hate terms having to do with challenges and struggles and exceptionalities. We see children who are not being served by the existing school system.
Yeah.
Whether they're not being served in any variety of ways, being highly successful in home education. Why? Because, obviously they've got the flexibility of time and dedicated coaching and teachers and mentorship at home, meaning their parents or whatever resources. And, just the love and support and complete integration within that lifestyle of learning where the pressure is gone, the barriers are gone, and that level of support is just available 24/7 for these kids to succeed. So we see so many kids in my own work, and again, the research bears this out, right? But that kids with different learning styles, needs, or different, whatever, challenges, let's say, are being met through home education where they're not being met in traditional schools. So right there is another whole area that we see enormous successes.
Yeah. Well, I love how you phrase that, too. I was actually thinking about that not long ago, that, we call maybe children who, we call them special needs, children who have these challenges. But in actuality, we all have some sort of challenge in a way that we can benefit from a customized education. So those are great.
I'm glad you said that, too, because that's the thing. when you look at it, any one of my kids probably has special needs by someone's definition, right? I probably have special needs by someone's definition, because today there's a disorder or a label for everything. I'm just joking. But in fact, we all have different styles and needs. I have one child who's, completely got his face in the books, and then I have another one who's drumming on the table and bouncing on a ball, so this is just the nature of the human race, where there's nothing wrong with either one of my kids. They're just learning differently. And, they've both been successful in his own way. So it just irks me, I guess, to hear of these kids who are labeled and who are, misplaced in various classrooms and programs when really they're just being themselves and just living out their lives the way they were made to be.
Yeah.
So that's really the beauty of the whole, the whole home education lifestyle is just to allow our kids to grow into whoever they were meant to be.
Yeah. If they don't fit in a box, there's no reason why we should label them, because like you said, I love that, just that they're meant to be who they are. So, well, and let's talk about, one of your books, you talked about mentoring. What are some of those habits that you feel like people can adapt in their personal life to make them more successful at homeschooling?
Right. Okay. Well, that's a great question. So number one, I would always talk about, just reading. And I know this is kind of a no-brainer maybe, but I've entered a lot of homes with no books and no libraries, and I understand budgetary factors and things like that, but we have libraries, right? So reading is just something that we can always mentor, that we can always model to our kids and make available to our kids, because the impact is immeasurable. I don't even think anyone can even state or overstate or understate the importance of just instilling a love of reading in our kids and always making that available, right? So that's one area. Another area that I always like to stress, and I know this is a sore point for some people, but I'm going to say it anyway, and that has to do with kind of organization. And I'm not thinking that everyone needs to be a superhuman organizer or, a superhero in creating homeschool portfolios and beautifully decorated, binders and that kind of thing. But I think that an area that really children need to master and needs to be taught at home, that those foundational skills have to do with organization. So whether it's organizing their lives, their materials, their information, their, resources, I think that that's something that has to be taught at home. And I actually teach workshops and seminars about organization to homeschoolers. And you can't imagine the mothers usually who come to me after these seminars and say, golly, I wish I could get my son or daughter to do that. So I think that's something that can be mentored and can be taught at home and really should be emphasized. Again, not to the superhero level, if it's just not, if it's not realistic in that home. But I think just teaching executive skills and organizational skills to our kids is highly, highly important to be successful in life.
Yeah, well, and I think that's one advantage to homeschooling, that I hope that anyone who homeschools does come to the mindset that you realize that your children learn best from the mentor that they have around them, which is you. And even children that aren't homeschooled, I think that's one misconception that parents may have, that if you don't love to learn or don't love to read, it doesn't matter what teacher you put them in front of, they're going to grasp onto that naturally from their own parents regardless. Would you agree with that? That maybe homeschooling gives us a front row seat into how important that mentoring is?
Yeah, I definitely think that's important. But I just also want to say, too, reading and that kind of thing doesn't necessarily have to be the classics. I'm not talking about, reading C.S. Lewis or reading anything in particular. It could be reading the news. It could be learning how to conduct research. I mean, what we're really getting after, I think, is for our kids to be able to formulate ideas, right? Intelligent discussion, to be able to discern between different bits of information, to be able to, clearly articulate what they're thinking about, hold opinions about things. So that can come from reading the classics, but it can also come from reading, video game magazines, or it could come from reading, the news on your MSN homepage. I mean, it could come from anywhere at all. But we really are trying to get our kids to just think for themselves, and I think that comes from reading. And also, to just follow that through, it also comes from talking and discussing with our kids and encouraging those kinds of, just providing that kind of environment where our kids can freely discuss their ideas that they have learned through research and reading. So it really all rolls up together. And I mean, I know I often meet families who will say, gosh, my son or daughter never shuts up. They never stop talking. And they're always homeschoolers. They're talking about homeschoolers because my kids are the same way. They're always talking. We're always talking. But, it's through that reading, that listening, that discussion, that talking. That's where all that discernment comes from. That's where all that really good thinking comes from and the ideas evolve from. So I can't think of better mentoring than what you and I are talking about right now, right? Because that's where this is why these kids are going to be the thought leaders and the world changers, because we've encouraged that from day one.
Yeah, and that we've given them a space maybe to share those ideas that they're not competing with other people for, maybe so.
Exactly. You don't need to raise your hand at the dinner table to share what you know about, whatever you're reading about, environmental issues or political issues or whatever they may be. They're just there, and we encourage it. So that, I would have to say, is probably my very favorite thing about home education, and just having that time and space to just be with our kids, to really bounce these ideas around and hear them. And gosh, and it just gets so fascinating as they grow, too, to hear what's in their minds and on their hearts, after so many years of kind of wondering if anything's kind of,
sticking
in.
yeah. That's
really
great.
Fun.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Well, tell us we've talked a little bit about some of the videos and stuff that you're going to be producing, but tell us more about some of your long-term goals of what you hope to accomplish and maybe what your legacy is, that you hope your legacy to be.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm kind of entering that phase of life now where my kids are all grown up, right? So I guess that's something that I'm thinking about more and more, because as I mentioned, my kids are all in college or have graduated from college now. So, in addition to someday maybe being a grandmother, which is one of my goals. Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm very much about a heart for home education, and I really see that being something that I will continue to do until probably, the day I leave this earth, is because I just really feel that the nation's system of education is just in such dire straits. Unless something happens over the next, 10 or 20 or 40 years, which honestly I don't really feel confident that's going to happen, I really think that the solution for our kids, our communities, our states, and the whole planet is going to be coming from these young people that we're raising. So I really feel like, my legacy, if you want to use that word, is just really going to be, I want to be remembered as a person who encouraged others to really redefine the meaning of education and really redefine what it means to be a truly educated person and to be able to contribute to modern society, to our communities, to really be the kind of leaders that we need to make changes in our states, in our countries, and on the planet, really. So I do see myself as continuing to be involved in home education or any form of education that really forces folks to kind of re-examine what it truly means and push the boundaries of that kind of line of thinking. That's really where I do think I'm going to be remembered. That's where my heart and soul really lies.
Yeah. Well, all true education is really self-education, correct? I mean, regardless of where it comes from. It's got to come from your desire to teach yourself in a way. Great.
Well, absolutely. And, I'm still learning, right? I'm sure you're still learning.
Yeah.
And it's not something that I plan to stop anytime soon. And I'm still learning through my kids every single day, who's studying for this and who's just got a job in that, and we just continue learning. And I think the moment you stop learning is when you just drop dead, because there's just nothing left, right?
Yeah.
So I know that sounds extreme, but really, what is life about? Life is just, without getting all crazy and existential and everything, but what is life really about is just about developing and moving forward and, becoming self-aware and making contributions and that kind of thing. So that's kind of where I'm at right now, and I just love doing it. And I'm just I guess I feel so blessed that I've had the opportunity to do it with my own kids, too, and introduce that mindset and that consciousness to my kids as well so that they can continue that in the world also. So that's really meaningful to me, that my kids, when asked, want to home educate their kids, for example, and want to continue working in these fields and thinking in that realm. So I'm really happy that I got to play a little part in that.
That's neat. It fits perfect
Thanks.
with the tagline that I have here of changing the paradigm. So great. So before we say goodbye, do you have any final parting words of advice that you'd like to share? And then please give us your contact information and let our audience know how they can get in touch with you.
Sure. Thank you so much. Well, I guess my only parting words would be, my parting words could be long. But one thing I do want to say is that because homeschooling is a lifestyle, right? It's a lifestyle choice, and it can become a very difficult lifestyle at times due to the different kinds of seasonal changes that we talked about in our lives and the different kinds of things that crop up. Is one of the things that I have become a little bit more concerned about recently is moms who homeschool and protecting their time, their sanity, their health, their well-being when they're sometimes overtaxing and overstretching themselves with so many different things going on in their lives. So that's just a little parting thought that I would love to get in there, is that through it all, it's really important for mamas in particular to protect themselves and, their own senses of self and well-being, and not getting lost in the process, if you will.
Yeah, you can't give away what you don't have, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I've begun actually doing an awful lot of writing about women who are stretched too thin and doing just a little bit too much. So what I was
that wouldn't be me at all.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's kind of I'm describing myself.
No,
right?
I'm totally that describes me too.
Yeah. But, that trap of needing to be everything and doing everything for everyone all the time. So I've begun actually writing quite a bit on my blog, on my website, which is marieclairemoreau.com. I've begun writing a great deal about women and, just women's health, because this has also been a concern over the years as more and more families are entering homeschooling and just taking on so much in their own lives. Yeah, I invite people to connect with me on my website. It's marieclairemoreau.com. I'm also really super active on Facebook. If anybody wants to hit me up on Facebook, I have a Facebook page, or they can friend me on Facebook. Or on any of the social media sites, I'm on Pinterest and Twitter and Google Plus and all those places. I would love to connect with people. And, just let me know what you guys are thinking. I love to hear from my readers. I like to hear from, questions, kind of what is on people's minds, so I can write about it or talk about it or address it. And I welcome opportunities to speak to parent groups, online conferences, virtual conferences, really across the country. I love making appearances because I get to connect with people individually. So that's another thing I'll just throw out there. I would love to meet, your listeners wherever they might be.
Great. Well, and it's been such an honor to have you on. I really appreciate you coming on and taking the time, even though you're extremely busy, to talk to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure to do it, and I love the website and the program, and I will continue following because I've learned a couple of things myself. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. To learn more about Dr. Marie Claire Moreau, go to our show notes at theluminousmind.net. Be sure to become a subscriber to our free email list and consider joining our program by going to the scheduling tab to become a fire starter today. Help support the podcast by making all your Amazon purchases through the free Amazon widget on our website. Also, sign up to receive 2 free audiobooks from Audible at theluminousmind.net. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, Google+, and now Pinterest. Get our audio content by subscribing on YouTube, iTunes, and Stitcher. To help us grow, consider telling your friends about us. Leave us a review. Tell us how we can help you so together we can continue to light minds on fire and change the paradigm of education.